Before we start the video, all of the assets that I used in this tutorial are in the description. Let's start by adding a plane and scale it in the x-axis. Duplicate the same plane, we'll make walls out of it. Go to the modifiers and add a mirror modifier. Select the plane as the mirror object. Switch it to the y-axis. Add another plane and make it as the back wall. For the ceiling, let's duplicate the floor and put it on top. Let's add a camera. Reset every axis and try to put it in the middle of the scene. We will fix it later. Let's add a light and check if there is a light spilling in the corners. It looks good for now. Import the first asset, the door. Put it in the back and make sure it doesn't go through the plane. Here I'm just fixing the scale so it looks right. Import the second asset, the wall border. Scale it in the x-axis. We will do the same thing that we did for the walls. Add a mirror modifier, switch it to the y-axis, push it to the back. Duplicate the same object, put it near the door. And let's duplicate it again. Scale it in the z-axis by -1. And now for the third asset, import the object. Put it in the door. I used the Silent Hill door reference. I started tweaking the scale, rotation and position to make it more realistic. Import the chain asset with the path because we'll use the path as the guide for the chain. Now I'm positioning the chain. Use the path to control it. Lower the middle part of the path because of gravity to make it more realistic. If you want to duplicate the chain, duplicate it with the path. And if you want to twist the chain, press Ctrl T and twist it. Now let's start with the texture. I used these 3 textures from Quixel Bridge. Start by deleting the AO map. Ctrl T to add the mapping nodes. Make sure that you have Node Wrangler add-on enabled. UV unwrap everything. I started adjusting the scale of the texture in the mapping node. Add a gamma with a mix RGB. Now I'll add a noise texture as a factor for the mix RGB. Add a color ramp. Here I'm just testing and tweaking the parameters. This noise will control how much dirt and grunge in the wall. You can control how much you want it to be dirty by increasing the gamma. Now let's add another mix RGB. I will add a little bit of orange to make the wall more colorful and warm. Switch the blending mode to color. Now I'll add a noise texture with the mapping nodes. Switch the coordinate to object. Play with the parameter. Add an ambient occlusion node with a color ramp to control the value. Add another mix RGB node. Connect the color ramp as a factor for the mix RGB. Change the color to a dusty or brown color and connect it to the base color. You can change how much dirt you want by changing the value of the color ramp. I wanted to make the wall more rough, so let's add a bump node and connect the color texture to the height. Lower the strength. The wall doesn't look right, so let's fix it. Add a noise with a texture coordinate. Let's add a mix shader. Change the blending mode to add. Connect the noise and the roughness to the mix. Play with the coordinate. Don't forget to enable the specular. I forgot to add the specular, so it looks wrong. Add a color ramp to the noise and to the roughness so we can control the value. Here I'm just playing with the noise. It won't work because I forgot to enable the specular. Let's start with the second texture, the floor texture. Don't forget to delete the AO map. Add the texture coordinate connected to all the textures. Now I'm playing with the UVs and the scale of the texture. Okay, so now let's add a brick texture with a hue saturation and a mix texture. Connect the image to the mix texture and the brick texture to the factor. Tweak the brick texture to match the floor lines. So the brick texture will control the dust between the floor lines. Now I'm fixing the UVs to match the lines of the brick texture. Now let's add dust in the corners. Add a hue saturation and an RGB curve with an S curve. Lower the saturation. Okay, now let's make the dust in the corner. Add two mix RGB nodes. The first node will have the dust color, the other one will control the amount of the dust. Here I copied the ambient occlusion texture that we made for the walls to the floor. Now let's connect the color ramp to the mix RGB as a factor. If you want to change the distance of the dust, just tweak the color ramp. And now let's connect the mix RGB to the base color. Okay, so the base color is done. Let's start with the roughness. I want to add a little bit of wetness in the floor, so I added a color ramp. Nothing will happen here because I forgot to enable the specular. Add a bump and use the base color as the height for the bump strength. Import the fingerprint texture. Add a mix RGB texture and make the blending mode to overlay. Add a color ramp and play with the values. Here I enabled the specular. And now go around and tweak the texture, play with it until you get something that you like. Okay, so that's it for the texture. Let's start with the light. Add the light asset and position it near the door. For the light, we're gonna choose a spotlight. Let's increase the size and the beam shape size. Also, don't forget to increase the power of the light. Here I'm changing the position of the spotlight, placing it between the door and the light. Duplicate the same light. Increase the beam size to 180 and the size to 1.4 and the power to 300. Everything looks good now, but I want to smooth out the scene, so let's add a fog. Delete the principal shader and add a principal volume and increase the emission. Don't forget to connect the volume to the volume output. So that's it for the scene. Let's start with the animation. Duplicate the camera. And let's make the focal length of the camera to 240mm and center it in the scene. And for the timeline, it will be 140 frames. For the rotation, make the Y15 and go to the first frame. Add a keyframe by pressing I to the rotation and to the location. Go to like 70 frames and change the position of the camera and the rotation. Let's make the rotation to 8. Add another keyframe and change the interpolation to linear. Okay, so that's it for the first camera. Let's add a marker and go a frame ahead. Add another marker for the second camera. Make sure to position the camera at the center of the scene. This camera will have a wide focal length. Change the Y rotation to 7 and add a keyframe at frame 71. Go to frame 140 and add another keyframe. Change the interpolation to linear and the rotation to 0. And now go to frame 70, press on the marker and choose the close-up camera. Press Ctrl B. Now the close-up camera is blended to the marker. Go to the second marker at frame 71 and go to the wide camera and press Ctrl B. Here I changed the second spotlight to be more warmer. So I added a little bit of orange. Now let's animate the light. Go to the light emission texture. Press I to add a keyframe. Go to the graph tab, modifiers, and add a noise modifier. Press on restrict frame range. The start should be where you want the flicker to start and the end where you want it to stop. Now let's increase the scale and strength. Copy everything that we made for the light to the two spotlights. Well, that's it for the scene. We have just last thing, which is the render settings. And for the render setting, I used 400 sample, enabled the denoise. For the light path, the total light path is 8. I turned off the caustics. And for the render output, I used OpenEXR. Well, that's it for this tutorial. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram. Yeah. See ya.